Good. The mic's unmuted. Okay, wonderful. Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Concordia University's Forest Space, and thank you so much for joining us for today's event, Montreal, Promoting Biodiversity by Protecting Pollinators in 2002 until 2027, probably beyond. And we're happy to welcome André-Philippe Picard, préposé au renseignement entomologique à l'Insectarium de Montréal, collection et recherche, et aussi Sarah Breger, excuse-moi, Espace pour la vie, coordinatrice en éducation coopérative de solidarité pour la flora. To help situate you, we are streaming to YouTube Live from Forest Space, and we are located here on unceded Indigenous lands in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal. At Forest Space, we work with our university community to mobilize knowledge. We co-create daily activities to help examine research questions and projects in development here at the university. We're running this hybrid event as a Zoom meeting as well, so we welcome comments and questions with a raised hand via the chat. For those of you in the space, of course, if you'd like to participate during the Q&A, just let us know, and by raising your hand, we'll be sure to get a microphone over to you. And with that, it is my pleasure to pass it to André-Philippe. Welcome.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. I'm just going to share my screen. So this share, and then presenter mode. Okay, got it. So yeah, that's it. I'm an entomologist. I work at the Insectarium, and we are here to talk about pollinators. And for my part, more specifically about the Montreal's pollinator protection plan. So this is what my talk is going to look like. So I'll first give a short introduction on pollinators, or who are they, why are they important, and how are they doing? And then we'll dive into the protection plan itself, which is divided in 3 main goals, and we will see them in more details. And then if you have questions, you'll be invited to ask them to me. So yeah, pollinators. I think most of the time when we hear that word, we think about bees. And it's true that bees do most of the jobs, and more broadly insects. But there are they are a highly diverse group. So here, for example, on my slide, you can see different types of flies on the top right and left. Butterflies, of course, bees. So I have a bumblebee at the bottom right. And at the center, up in the center, that's a hummingbird. So there are also pollinators. So mostly insects, but also other kinds of animals, sometimes vertebrates. And when we created the protection plan, we went in the available data to see how many species of pollinators do we have here in Montreal on the island. And we came up with that number for 135 species. So this is a conservative estimate. They are certainly more than that. And with the work we are doing, we will find more for sure. And so, yeah, why are pollinators important? Well, because they are pollinators. So most flowering plants, approximately 90% of all the flowering plants in the world are pollinated by animals. So knowing that, well, it's easy to understand that pollinators are vital to the health of natural ecosystems. We also need them as humans because they pollinate the majority of what we eat. So 3/4 of the crops rely at some point on pollinators. And the number in green, that's the annual market value of animal pollinated crops. So it's in hundreds of billions of dollars annually. So yeah, we need them. But the problem is they are not doing good. recent research show that in many parts of the world, many groups of insects are declining, and pollinators are one of them. And this is because of four main drivers. So habitat destruction and degradation due to urbanization, monoculture, for example. Climate change, of course, usual suspects. So because of extreme temperatures we see, and this causes mortality in many species and also range shifts to the north. Exotic species are also a threat. And finally, the use of pesticides, which are still widely used in agriculture, for example. So this is why Montreal came up with a protection plan. So it's called a pretty poetic title, in my opinion, Promoting Biodiversity by Protecting Pollinators. So it was launched during the COP15, so last year, and it was created jointly by three central departments at the City of Montreal. So that's the Bureau de la Transition Écologique et de la Résilience. So that's the BTER that you will see throughout the presentation. Le Service des Grands Parcs also, and finally us at Espace pour la Vie, and especially at the Insectarium. So yeah, the Insectarium being part of Espace pour la Vie, like the Botanical Garden, the Biodome Planetarium, and the Biosphere now. So what is in that plan? Three main goals. So and we will see them in details, but the goal one is about habitats. So conserving, creating, and connecting pollinator-friendly habitats. Goal two is about improving their living conditions. So it's mainly about how we manage those habitats. And finally, recognizing the importance of pollinators for biodiversity. And this is essentially through research and outreach. So yeah, goal one, conserving habitats. So for example, one of the actions identified in the plan and associated to the first goal is protecting 10% of, reaching 10% of protected areas in the City of Montreal by 2030. And within those protected areas, we want to maintain open spaces, which are important habitats for pollinators. So an example here, this is the Parc Frédéric Bach here in Montreal. It's basically a huge meadows loaded with flowers. So it's a pollinator paradise. If you haven't had the chance to go there already, I highly recommend it. It's beautiful right now, by the way. It's full of goldenrods. So protecting and also creating. And I'll be quick on that specific point because Sarah will be giving more examples shortly. But the idea is creating new habitats to add them to the ones that are already there. And on the figure on the right, you can see different types of habitats, small or bigger, that can be created to help pollinators. Of course, citizens can also do their part, but right now, there are still many boroughs that have regulations that is a problem because people cannot do what they want to do on their with their lawn. So they have to have it cut like the maximum height, for example, is between 15 and 30 centimeters. You cannot grow anything in there. So yeah, the idea with this action is to update those regulations to allow the citizens to create habitats in their yard. And connecting, so we want to conserve, we want to create, and it's important to connect all those small and bigger habitats. Connectivity is super important. It's essential to enable pollinator movement and thus increase genetic exchange and population resilience. And in the case of pollinators, I can give the example of many wild bees. They have very small populations. So if something, a perturbation happens where that small population is, when it's gone, if their habitat is not connected to others around it. Goal 2, improve pollinators' living conditions. So it's basically about management. And there are several things that can be done. For example, reducing mowing frequency. This of course enhances the ability and the diversity of plants, and it's been documented that it's good for the insects too. And I want to bring your attention on the figure on the right. So the first line on top shows that the overall abundance of arthropod increases when mowing frequency decreases. And you see next to the small black arrow, it shows that pest abundance decreases while non-pest increases under a low mowing regime. So this is a good argument for people, for example, who who don't like pests and try to control them. So they can do they can invest less efforts. That reduces management costs too, and it ends up being good for the whole patch or the whole habitat. So reduce mowing frequency. Of course, reduce or eliminate ideally pesticides. So this is for Montreal, right? The city of Montreal. And there's already a bylaw that's been adopted a few years ago that is highly restrictive on pesticide use. And in the protection plan, it is planned to modify that bylaw, because right now some golf courses are not included they don't have to follow that bylaw, so they can still use some pesticides. And now the idea is to extend that bylaw to them and favor different approaches such as integrated pest management to reduce the more possible the volume of pesticide that is used in Montreal. Yeah, so this is like a glue trap. It's something sticky that is on the trunk of a tree. And I think it's for some aphid control in that particular case. Preferring native nectar plants. So I have a few examples here. And on the Space for Life website, there's a tool that can be used to help find what kind of plants could be planted in your yard or in the park if you are a park manager at the city of Montreal. So it's called the green pages down there, and you can use the different filters to find what you're looking for. And why prefer native plants? Well, they are adapted to the environmental conditions here, and more importantly, they evolved for hundreds or of thousands of years with our native pollinators, which are also more efficient at pollinating them. So if we want to favor native species, native pollinators, native insects, then it's better to favor native plants too. And finally, the last goal, as I said, is about research and outreach. And this is, you see on the right, you see the SFL, that's Space for Life. So this is our job at Espace pour la Vie, Space for Life. This is where we come into play. So this goal aims at have a better understanding, a better knowledge of the pollinators that we have here in Montreal. And this goes through monitoring, for example, and monitoring can be done in different ways. One one approach that we like a lot at Espace pour la Vie is citizen science or community science. And we have several projects using this approach, like Mission Monarch, eButterfly. We also use iNaturalist a lot. So we have that Biodiversity Challenge project on that platform. And this is a great way to get people involved. And everybody learns a lot when we use that community science approach. And we've been doing it, on the picture on the right, bottom right, that's for the Monarch during a Mission Monarch field trip. And we've been doing it a lot this summer for nocturnal insects. Because there's not a lot that's known about moth, for example, but their diversity is huge. And we are only beginning to understand their role as pollinators. And it's so fun to do. You just set a white sheet there, and you open the lamp, and you just wait for the insects to come to the sheet, and everyone loves it. So citizen science is one approach, but it has its own biases. So it's partially biased. You get data from where people live or when people like to go. Also a lot from charismatic species like the monarch. So there's less data that is getting collected on some species at some places using that approach. So this is why we have more rigorous monitoring schemes too. What you see on the right, that's a nesting box. We, during the first part of that project that was about studying the insects that use those structures, we found 6 new species for Quebec that were not known in the province. So we got excited and we decided to go on with that project. So this is a prototype we are testing this summer. So they are all over the place in the botanical garden right now. And we'll see what emerge from there next spring. And at the bottom, those are bee bowls. So it's a standard protocol to study bees. And we actually collaborate with different organizations like Polyflora to know how the restoration efforts, how do they impact the pollinators like bees. So monitoring and to get more information, but we also want to disseminate, to share those information with the public. So one way we do it is through our website again, at this Space for Life. So we have a portal, it's called All About Pollinators, with loads of information there. We also have that service called the Entomological Information Service, and that's my job. So people can reach out to us by email, ask questions or send photos. You can even come to our museum and drop a specimen, and we will tell you what it is, if it's in good shape. So identification service mostly. Again, about so this is more about celebrating the pollinators. Montreal is a monarch-friendly city now. It's also part of the Bee City network. So those are like accreditations that we get if we can prove that we do lots of things for bees and monarchs and pollinators in general. So that's like a quality stamp that you get when you promote those insects in various ways. And one way, well, I'll get back to it, but another stamp that you can get is the My Space for Life garden stamp. So it was mostly for citizens, but now it can also be used by boroughs, for example, to then again have their garden that displayed on our website, and it's part. You just get part in a network of habitats that we want to document. And this is about celebration. So, of course, scientific communication is a great way to reach out, but it's not the only one. And we, for example, this summer at the Insectarium, we had an event called the Butinerie, which was basically a party for families and kids. They were invited to come and learn how they can do something. So that young person there just planted nectar plants, native nectar plants. And there were lots of things going on to get people to think about pollinators in more creative way or more emotional way, as well as scientific information that is being shared. And it was that event took place in our botanical garden. So this is in front of the Insectarium, the picture you see on the bottom. So going back to that figure about the main drivers of decline of the pollinators, there is in the protection plan actions that tackle all those drivers at the level of the city of Montreal, and that's a very good first step. Of course, there are things that can be done at the more individual levels and things that need to be done at the province level and federal level, international level too. But our plan, the pollinator protection plan that we have here in Montreal is a good tool to improve the habitats and recognize importance of pollinators for biodiversity. And I guess that's it. I went quickly. Hope I didn't speak too too fast. So, do you have any questions?
If there are any questions online, you can either put them in the chat or raise your hand. We'll see them there. Anybody in the space has any questions? We'll get a microphone to Mo. Do you have a question? All right.
I don't know if there's some online, but merci André-Philippe. I have two questions. One is out of the action plan, who's supporting boroughs who wish to maybe increase pollinator type of garden or change some of the regulation, like you mentioned, for the mowing and things like that? Because I'm thinking that at the borough level, they don't have that expertise. And you mentioned in the action plan that there's 3 divisions involved. So how are the support to the bigger Montreal city through those 3 divisions? So.
Yeah, that's a great question. And that support comes mostly from the Bureau de la Transition écologique et de la résilience through workshops, for example, and reports or the materials that is being created by that bureau, the BTR, and shared with the managers at each boroughs. For example, 2 weeks ago, there was a workshop at the Botanical Garden with all the people involved in such jobs, that they need to do and change eventually in the borough. So the BTR is organizing those events to connect those people with the experts, like at Espace pour la Vie. And so yeah, the short answer is the Bureau de la Transition écologique et la résilience, le BTR.
That is doing, okay. So what about the Service des Parcs? Are they, because anyway, it leads to my second question, and maybe this is where Service des Parcs is involved. I'm wondering what is the relationship with some of those goals in the action plan with maybe some of the communauté, la CMM, Communauté de Montréal initiative, like the Green Belt, for example. I know bees are probably not traveling as much as other type of fauna, but is there a bit of a connectivity plan throughout the greater Montreal, more than just an action plan for Montreal itself?
Yes. So I don't know the details about what is planned for the CMM, but for sure the 10%, the goal of 10% for the city of Montreal will contribute to the goal of 30% for the whole CMM. But how this is precisely connected, this is not my expertise. So we were involved more in the insect part, so the entomological expertise. This is what we have, and for those, I think for you to get that answer, the bétail again would be the best people to
Okay,
reach
so
out.
just to make sure I understand, like the connectivity of pollinator, like I'm thinking, for example, the le Mont-Royal. So boroughs that have the Mont-Royal in there, it's like, okay, for sure they tick the 10%, but are you looking at the 10% in different, like when you show the map, like in different areas, or it can be this new park that the mayoress just mentioned? So that's also going to be a huge land, so a high percentage. So what is the connectivities of those pollinators? Is it really short scale? Like,
yeah. So the goal of 10% is 10% on the whole Montreal area, so the city of Montreal. And now when we want to conserve new habitats, the idea of connectivity will be an important factor that will be taken in account when we choose, to protect those new places or create new ones. And I know Polyflora works has a specific projects about connectivity too. But yeah, the goal of 10% is through the whole city. And then within boroughs, when we look at specific habitats to conserve or create, then connectivity will be taken in account.
thanks.
Yeah. Is that it?
We have one question on Zoom. I'll just read it out. Just asking from an Alana Phillips, what are the conditions to be considered or certified as a citizen pollinator garden?
Yeah. So the main characteristics that you need for your garden would be to have a majority of native nectar plants, and also a diversity of plants that allows for blooming during all summer long. Well, actually from the spring to the fall, so that pollinators have foods during all the season. And so food is one of the main parts, and the other main part is to have nesting habitats. So leaving leaves on the ground, leaving dead stems on the grounds too, and having open bare ground, so that ground nesting bees can nest in there, or cavity nesting bees can nest in logs, for example, or in dead plant stems.
I have an additional question that's kind of a relevant follow-up both to modes and to that question, and that is whether, so I've heard about sort of the certification program for individual citizens gardens and for parks. Are there, because we have a moderate sized footprint as a campus, both downtown and in the western side of Montreal, are there similar kinds of either guidelines or certifications for organizations who may want to contribute to the pollinator plan and or other parts of the city's biodiversity strategy?
Well, I know that I think there's a bee-friendly campus network that is associated with the Pollinator Partnership Canada. So those could be a great resource. And what applies to bee city and monarch friendly cities can also apply to campuses, so that the principles are basically the same. Yeah. So this could also be great resources to look at.
But there's no kind of program per se for organizations to be like stamped as we are contributing to Montreal's biodiversity goals and pollinator goals. There's nothing like that in place currently.
None that I know of.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean there are
Sure.
none, but do you know of any? No.
No.
No. Well, the space, my mon jardin, so my garden, Space for Life, as I said, will be available for organizations and boroughs, and I can talk with my colleagues to have it for campuses, for example. Yeah.
Well, maybe we need to work with other in Montreal university campuses to create a version of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I actually had a question that follows up on that pretty well. At Concordia, we're in the process of starting to collect our baseline data for biodiversity to then build the plan up. This year, we're working with a company called EcoPivot to do the baseline assessment. Our goal going forward, though, is to involve student research more. So having the students involved in a lot of citizen science. And I'm wondering if like Espace pour la Vie has any partnerships in that way that you could help to teach us the techniques that you're using so then we can use them on campus.
We would be interested in discussing this for sure. And I think this is similar to what we are already doing with other organizations like Polyflora. So we went in the field with them to basically teach them some monitoring protocols, standard protocols, and then they come to our labs to sort the samples and do some identification, but the most part of the BID is done by us. So this model could apply for in other contexts. So we could talk about this further.
You have any other questions? Oh, there's one.
Hi, so in your presentation, you mentioned that the botanical gardens is being surveyed for its pollinators, but probably this is one of the most well understood green spaces in Montreal for its biodiversity. So are there any other monitoring programs in other green spaces in Montreal for pollinators for this project?
Yeah, we, for example, using the moth sheet, with the lamp. So nocturnal insects were surveyed in many parks. So official parks, if I may say so, but also green spaces that will hopefully become parks, mostly in the east where I live. And besides that, we've been monitoring smaller patches where Polyflora works, for example, around the botanical garden, but also in other boroughs. And going back to the nesting box project that I mentioned, we did it, yes, in the botanical garden for that first part, but also in community gardens and green alleys in different boroughs. So yeah, we know that the botanical garden might not be representative of the rest of Montreal, and we are doing surveys in other places too. But at the meantime, it's also the botanical garden is a great indicator, because when a species arrives at somewhere, an introduced species or just a species that is moving up due to climate change, for example, the botanical garden is a great place to detect them. So it's important to look at both places.
Do you have any other questions? We're good.
Perfect.
Okay. Well, thank you, Andre Philippe. That was
Thank
a
you.
wonderful presentation. Great to hear. Just that, not just the breadth of kind of work that's going on in support of pollinators, but just kind of expanding our idea of what they even are. So thank you. But I also just want to the second part of today's event, we're really lucky to have Sarah Breger, who is coordinator in education with Polyflora. And thank you for coming in. And so over to you, Sarah.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? It works? Perfect. So I'm going to see if my sharing. Yes, and let's see if I can make it Perfect, wonderful. So thank you very much for having me. My name is, as was said, my name is Sarah, and I'm coordinator, education coordinator at Polyflora, and recently took over also the research aspect of it. So I'm working now with André Philippe and the Insectarium in the initiative for the pollinator. And now the word has escaped me, but let's see, the bee bowls. We're working with the bee bowls, and we're le recensement, excuse my franglais, le recensement of the pollinators. And I'll talk about that a bit later. So just a bit of history about Polyflora to explain my next slide. Polyflora, if you've never heard of us, you may have heard about our old name, which was Miel Montréal, Honey Montreal, if we want to translate. It's about 10 to 12 years ago, a group of urban beekeepers got together because one, they want to share best practices for ecological beekeeping. And also they want to talk about saving pollinators. And at the time, beekeeping was one of the solutions that was proposed here in Quebec and elsewhere. However, because Polyflora has worked a lot with the scientific community, we've slowly but surely learned that urban beekeeping is not the solution to saving pollinators for a couple of reasons. And I'm mentioning this here because whenever I go to a conference or a presentation about pollinators, every time somebody asks me a question, well, I want to put, or tells me, I want to help pollinators, I want to put a hive in my backyard. We love honeybees. They're great. They create honey. They're great pollinators, but they're not native species to Quebec. They were brought over. So here we're talking about Apis mellifera. So the domestic honeybee was brought over with the colonizers 400 years ago. So when we're talking about saving native bees in Quebec, putting a hive is not necessarily the solution. Also, you have to know that if you put a hive in a place where there's not enough resources, so we're talking about nectar and pollen-rich flowers, not only will the hive have some trouble, it's like imagine putting a cow in a pasture with no grass, but all the resources will be taken away from the native bees and the native pollinators, who, if they do live in colonies that are much smaller. So take into account that honeybees can live in colonies up to 100,000 individuals, sometimes even more. So they're great pollinators, but can take a lot of the resources. So just today, I'm going to give you a couple of examples about gardens, but I find it important to mention this fact because it's always brought up about, oh, I want to put a hive. Great. At Polyflora, we love honeybees. We have hives in urban setting, but it's really important to know the context of where you're putting the hive. Is there enough resources, so pollen and nectar rich flowers, not only for your hive so that it's healthy, but also for the native pollinators that live here on the island of Montreal. So what can you do to help the pollinators? Well, of course, as André Philippe mentioned, you can create habitats for pollinators. Just a disclaimer, I translated my PowerPoint last night very late, and my English made sense to me last night around 11 p.m., but there may have been translations that were not exact. So I do apologize. It's not my team's mistake. I may have trusted Google Translate a bit too much. So, so one of the ways you can do it, as André Philippe was talking about, to help pollinators, to create habitats for pollinators. And it's important to put the accent that there's a habitat is plural because there's a plurality of ecosystems. I mean, that's large, but of biodiverse plants that you can put in the city to help pollinators. I'm going to give you a couple of examples of what we do at Polyflora. This is not the only examples. We're a small organization. We have, you know, a couple of model gardens that we use, but at home, you can also, depending on where you live, if you have a little balcony or a larger garden, you can also use the tools that André Philippe mentioned during his presentation to choose plants that are interesting for the pollinators in your area. So there's, of course, wild prairies, which is a mistranslation. I should have said meadows. I heard André Philippe say meadows. So the wild meadows is more of you use seeds, you disperse seeds, and you let them grow as they will. You've also got a pollinator garden, which is more of a, we use that term to use more of a traditional garden. So you choose where you want to plant. If at home you want a garden that's more, you want your milkweed to be in a certain place and you want your goldenrod to be a certain place, you can use a more traditional pollinator garden model. You can also use gardens or create gardens that are concentrated around one pollinator. We have a monarch garden because of course, monarchs are in peril right now. So, but what you have to know about these types of gardens that we do call it a monarch garden because we plant, for example, milkweed, but it's not limited to monarchs. So it's not, of course, something that's interesting to a monarch is going to be equally interesting to a bumblebee or maybe to a hoverfly. So you can choose certain plants for certain pollinators, but if you choose well, it's going to be interesting for other pollinators as well. And of course, important here in Montreal, a shade garden. What we often hear at Polyflora is, well, I live near a building, half the day or most of the day there's shade. That means I can't do anything for pollinators. Well, that's not the case. You can either use certain plants that do flower in the shade, or you can use that space to create an environment that's good for other things. So as was mentioned earlier today, for nesting, super important. We need resources for them to feed, but you can also create a place that's good for nesting, for reproducing. Use the resources that are there, that Space for Life have created to create an ambiance, a space. It's not the exact translation, but a space that's good for all types of pollinators. So those are just a couple of examples, but I'll show you what we've been doing in Montreal and around Montreal. So with what I love are before and after pictures. So we've got our first one here. Yes, Châteauguay, which is of course off the island of Montreal, but not too far. So Châteauguay in 2021 contacted us and had this space that was not used. In French, we'd say terrain vague. And they wanted to do something for their citizens. So we started creating this garden that's partly a wild meadow, but partly also a pollinator garden with a planned placement for the plants. And now that's 2022, the picture, but I've been to this year and it's really nice. And it's in really suburbia. Like there are houses. If you just drove past, you wouldn't potentially know there was a garden there, but it's really an excellent example that you don't have to be traditionally in the nature to have nature come to you. You could be in the suburbs, you can have houses, and you can really have pollinator gardens that are interesting for different types of pollinators. We also have La Tohu. So if you know La Tohu, well, it's right by Parc Frédéric Bach, which was one of the examples that André Philippe gave. La Tohu is right next to Cirque du Soleil. It's also a circus. And they decided in 2014, 2015 to make a pollinator path. And it's still there. It's still fun to walk down that path. And it actually links to their hives. It's one of the places where we do have hives. Before putting hives, we evaluate if there's enough resources. And these are some of the resources that are near those hives. And we have Campus 1000. So Campus 1000 is the new, or the new-ish, it's a recently built science building for University of Montreal. So that's in Outremont. And this is one of our oldest gardens. It's one of our model gardens. It needs almost no management. Because one of the points, also one of the ideas of having a pollinator garden with native species is that not only is it good for pollinators, but it also allows us as curators of these gardens to invest less time long-term. So, which is great if you have a budget or you're limited with time. It doesn't mean that you can't do anything. But you can really invest less time, less water, etc., because the native species are adapted to our context. Be it the cold, be it you don't have to replant the vivaces, which now they come back every year. You don't have to plant vivaces. Perennials. Thank you very much. They're perennials. So Campus 1000, if you want to go visit, it's on the Jardin Éphémère. It's one of our model gardens. And then the example that I want to mention, because it's not too far from you, ETS, which is another, we actually links well to the questions about making connections between higher education in Montreal. ETS is a space for higher education, which is about 20 minutes walk from here. And they decided in 2022 that they wanted to plant gardens that were interesting for pollinators. And so they planted 5 gardens in the middle of their campus. And each garden has a different theme is not the word, but let's say one will be a more traditional garden. So the pollinator garden, one is a pollinator meadow. One is a shade garden. And so this is really a great example of how with limited space, because they're still like as Concordia is downtown, there's not, we don't have kilometers and kilometers of space. Limited space, you can have gardens that are interesting for pollinators. And what I find super interesting is that this is one of the gardens where we're working with André Philippe and the Insectarium to inventory, a pollinator inventory. That was the word I was looking for before. And so this year we had our bee bowls, and we're working with the Insectarium to identify what type of pollinators were in these gardens, as well as other gardens that we have around the island of Montreal. That's a very good question. I believe there's an error in my. Thank you for pointing it out. I will at the end I will change that. Yeah, maybe that's a bit. They do grow. It is surprising though when they finally grow, it grows, but it may not be, or maybe it's beginning of August and end of September. But don't quote me on those dates. I have to check. Good question. And so, oh yes, so people ask me, well, other than pollinator, the fact that they're good for pollinators, which is already great, why do we want to create pollinator-friendly gardens with native species? One of them is that one of the reasons, the great reasons, is the fight against invasive species. That can also be native. So here we have l'herbe à poux, which is ragweed, a native plant, but which causes a lot of allergies because it is a plant that is pollinated by the wind. So the pollen is very fine, get into your airways, and a lot of people have a lot of trouble with allergies due to ragweed. One of the solutions to deal with ragweed is to plant gardens that have resistant native plants, so that when the ragweed seeds come, well, you've got some milkweed, you've got some goldenrod and others that'll take the place and that limit the place of ragweed. I'm going to talk about a couple of other benefits and challenges later on, but I want to underline a point as well that I hear a lot in trainings and conferences. People say, I don't want a pollinator-friendly garden in my backyard because I have allergies. What you have to know is that generally speaking, the plants that give the most allergies are the ones that are pollinated by the wind, because the pollen is very, very fine and gets to your airways because the plant wants the pollen to blow away. For native species of plants that are pollinated by insects, they don't want their pollen. They haven't evolved for their pollen to blow away. They have evolved for their pollen to stay close so that when the bees or the butterflies come, the pollen sticks to their body. So those are not the plants that are going to create the most allergies. So in fact, when you do plant pollinator-friendly gardens, you can be helping people avoid allergies in those high seasons. Also, we've talked about this as well, creating ecological corridors. This is a graphic is not the word, a graphic, a visual, a visuel. Now I'm just translating willy-nilly my French words, but this is what we use for our initiative Opération Gardienne des Pollinisateurs. So that's one of our projects that we want to create ecological corridors with a central garden and then smaller gardens around. This is an example that I'm showing what Polyflora does, but it doesn't mean that you as individuals or as universities or as organizations, if you're part of a co-op, can do yourself in your garden. The more gardens there are in the city, whether be they small, big, small, medium, the better it is. It's going to create more movement, and that's great for everyone. And of course, it's good for people. That's one of the important things we forget. So often when we're talking about gardens is that it's great for pollinators, it's great for nature, but we're also part of nature. We're not outside of it. And I personally I love it when I'm in the city and there's a lot of concrete and suddenly I see a place where I can just relax and observe what's going on, look at some flowers. So it's great. It's a great place for people to breathe, to kind of stay in the city, but be outside of the city as well. And so positive impacts, I've mentioned those before. Of course, there's the fight against allergenic and invasive plants, improving soil quality as well. It's not my area of expertise, so but there are people who work at the IRBV or at the Jardin Botanique that do specialize in that, and you can choose your plants to improve soil quality in the city. Also absorbing rainwater and reducing urban heat islands. That's another project we're working on this year with the Campus de la Transition. We're measuring it on the Parc Jean Drapeau. We have 6 different mixes of pollinator plants, and we're measuring not only the growth rate, but also how that affects heat islands, which I believe that's a translation for îlot de chaleur. Perfect. Thank you for confirming. So we're measuring the impact on heat islands and on the absorbing rainwater of these gardens. Of course, reducing greenhouse gases and highlighting local flora and fauna. It's a great, one of the big things we do in in education at Polyphera. We work with schools, we work with day camps, with libraries, and even if you have a tiny garden, it's great. You can go and you can see a lot of biodiversity in the city. And of course, the challenges, because that was one of the points. We have some experience on the ground, but there are challenges to creating gardens in the city. Here are the main ones that I thought that come up when I work with the public, but social acceptability of the gardens, especially wild meadows. So it's changing. I see the difference, but often what we'll hear is, oh, well, or we'll receive a message on social media saying, oh, well, you have a garden here, nobody's taking care of it. All the flowers are mixed together. There's some dead branches. There's some, there's a space for water, but the water is not clear. And so we have to really work with that and be like, well, it's on purpose. It doesn't look, because we may not, we're not used to that yet, but it's on purpose. We want a garden that's rewilds the city. But it's changing, especially we now have more and more people going, oh, I created that in my backyard, on my balcony. Also, misunderstanding of pollinator behavior, a lot of fear, which I understand. Some people have allergies, have had bad experiences, but a lot of the work we do, at least on the education side of it, is being like, well, bees are amazing, but also wasps. Because people hear wasps and they go, no, I want the wasps to disappear. We have to say, well, no, bees and wasps, they can sting, but they're really important ecologically. They're also important not only for pollination, but they're important wasps. That's my mission in life, to convince people that wasps are really cool. If wasps disappear, we'd have a lot of other pests, because wasps are omnivores that eat other insects. So we want those wasps. We just have to learn to coexist. So that's a big challenge. People are scared. Totally understand that, but a lot of education to do with that. And also regarding, I've already mentioned it, but having, the fear about pollen allergies, etc. And of course, unexpected weather events and animal visitors. That was one of our challenges this year with our test gardens on Parc Jean Drapeau. Well, one, the weather. That's a challenge for all our team when they're planting gardens, because when it's suddenly 40 degrees at 11 a.m. and they can't work, or there's a hurricane warning, because we can't work in that. So that's a big challenge in creating gardens. And animal visitors, that was a challenge I discovered this year with groundhogs. So you create a garden, you're really proud, you look at the first little shoots and you go, look at that, that's beautiful. And then the groundhog comes and eats it all. So that's a big challenge that you may also have when you're creating gardens in your backyard. I don't believe I have yes, so I do want to talk briefly about what you can do as individuals. Also, Polyflora, we work a lot with cities, public institutions, NGOs, universities, etc. So this is a picture we use often when we're talking to those bigger organizations, but I think it's important. I believe the individuals are the center part of the flower. And if for your those who are fans of plant biology, you know the center part of the flower is the most important part of the flower. It's the place that creates seeds. So as individuals, you can really have an impact. Not only influencing your school, the organizations around you, telling them that you want those types of gardens, that pollinators are important, but also even in your backyard, even if you live in a small apartment with a tiny balcony, you can put a bowl of water with a couple of rocks in it that helps pollinators drink, because pollinators need to drink. We often forget that they are animals too. So you can have a water source on your balcony on the side of your window, if that's what you have at home. You can also put, if you have a bit more room, put a couple of flowers. It's important to know that native pollinators, certain species of native pollinators need to eat quite regularly. So they can't fly, they don't necessarily fly kilometers and kilometers and kilometers. So if you have just a pot with a couple of plants, we're talking about pollen and nectar rich plants on your balcony, on the side of your window, that can really make a difference to individual pollinators. So really don't despair. Even if you just have a room, you can have an impact. And if you can't do that, well, the fact that you're listening to this conference, that you're here, sends a message that you're interested. So you could definitely have an impact wherever you live, whatever you do, whatever your interest is. So that's it for me for now. I don't know if there are any questions I have. Oh, no, I went backwards. My apologies. If you have any other questions now, I can answer them. Otherwise, you have my email here if you want to email me later. Yeah,
Thank you, Sarah. That was really interesting. I have a question about, some municipality or borough have been changing their regulation for urban agriculture.
Yep.
And even that resident can do a garden in front of their house or in the backyard. Are you aware, or did Polyflora or some other organization did study on a pollinator inventory? Like, is urban agriculture helping or not really, compared to all the examples you presented, like a meadow and things like that?
Oh, that's a good question. I can tell you what I believe if it does or not, but I don't know if André Philippe, you have any actual studies.
Yeah, well, we with the nesting boxes, we put some in community gardens in Montreal, and we found many species there. So the diversity of community gardens was like halfway between the one of green alleys and the one of the botanical garden. So we know that there are insects there. Many wasps actually. What we found is that there were approximately half and half predators and pollinators, which is interesting because they both play a role in the gardens, especially since pollinators, as you said, the wasps, they prey on pests, for example. So growers want them. So yeah, they don't need a lot of space. They only need small patches, but well, bigger is better, of course, but as Sarah was saying, small patches can host a surprisingly abundant and diverse fauna. So yeah, even small efforts bring results. But of course, the bigger is better and more is better too. But yeah, even small spaces like small community gardens have an impact.
Sorry, we looks like we have a question online. How many libraries do you work with?
I saw it pass and I went, okay, I'm trying to go through my inventory of how many libraries we work with. Excellent question. I want to say this year we went to 10 libraries, but I'd have to check. But we work all through the year with different libraries. They contact us it's important to know that now I'm talking, the libraries that we work with are for the education side of it. So we're going to go, we do conferences, activities with those libraries. So for now, about 10 per year on the island of Montreal, but also outside of the island of Montreal.
You've mentioned a couple times studies and research, and you've identified some kind of key indicators or targets that you're reaching toward in terms of data on pollinators, et cetera. Is there any central data repository about biodiversity data for Greater Montreal? Might there be? Is that something? I'm just thinking also about avenues for researchers and students to contribute to data and tracking and monitoring. Just wondering if there's anything in place or if that might be a potential area to explore.
Yes, that's one for me. So there's nothing specifically for Montreal, but of course, iNaturalist can be a great tool for that. For this more citizen science aspect of it, but for there are other tools like data repositories like GBIF that are used by researchers a lot, and those are two examples of data sources that we explored when we were trying to know how many species of pollinators there were in Montreal. You know, that number for 400 something, and this is becoming more and more like a best practice to share those data on GBIF. So those are like the two main places that we use and that are being used more and more. So GBIF and iNat.
We have one last question online. A huge challenge for me since I started gardening is squirrels. Do you have suggestions to keep them at bay, at least until fall? They are great at dispersing seeds. I don't hate them. I just like to have a garden in the summer. Smiley face.
Ooh, squirrels are also my big challenge. I have to say that because we don't, Polyflora we don't have, I'm going to start again, sorry. Our gardens are not potager, so we don't have edible plants. I mean, aside from thyme and in certain cases. So it's less of a challenge because if they do come and get our seeds and bring them around our garden, we're actually happy because that means that we're going to have some more native plants. On a personal level, I've put, that's just purely personal, but I've put a fence. Thank you very much. A fence that sometimes works and sometimes doesn't work. So that's unfortunately the squirrels are sometimes the bane of the existence of the gardener, the urban gardener. But I don't know if you have any solutions that you found the solution to squirrels.
Yeah, we are working on that big wasp,
That would be amazing.
No, well, as an ecologist, the first thing that comes to my mind is predators. They don't have enough predators, so that's why there are so many, and they have lots of food because people, people don't compost enough. But if you can adopt a fox, that would help. No, but jokes beside, there's no magic bullet for squirrels. Unfortunately, you gotta live with them.
I have a follow-up question. Your microphone. Yeah, maybe just a bit of a follow-up question on because I visited the campus La Transition a week ago, and yes, we saw like the white net on top of the different garden that you were prototyping for, mainly heat island effect, so with temperature control. But I guess they are also for pollinator, and that was something I was wondering. I was like, okay, on one hand they have the groundhog that are eating stuff, but if you put a net to avoid it, you're probably not helping the pollinator.
Yeah,
So I know there's no perfect world, but like,
it's an excellent question. And actually, we had an internal discussion about it because just to give a context to those who haven't seen the garden, it's in le Fort Sainte-Hélène on Parc Jean Drapeau. We have the project where we have 6 seed mixes that we're testing to see with the heat islands and the absorption rate for water. And those are the ones where the groundhogs are in paradise on Parc Jean Drapeau. They probably a lack of predators as well. And we're feeding them with our gardens. And we had a discussion internally saying, well, if we put nets, that means the groundhogs won't get to the plants, but it also means pollinators won't get to the plants. And we decided in the context of this project, because the goal was to measure the plant growth and have some data for heat islands, that we'd put the nets, we'd sacrifice a bit, the pollination aspect of it in order to have plants and measure the impact of those plants. But that's really the only garden where we have nets. It's really because there's a specific research objective to that garden.
and is there any nets that are developed to not affect the pollinator? Like I'm thinking of something a bit bigger, like that will prevent from animals cruel and all those, but will still help the pollinator. Like maybe it's too much of a specific question, but it might be interesting to prototype different size of mesh for nets. But
well, it also depends on, and you might have an answer to this, it also depends on which pollinators, because certain, for example, flies or microhymenoptera can get through certain sizes of nets. So we're talking about bumblebees, it's a bit harder, but it doesn't, even if there's a net, doesn't mean that all pollinators can access it. In this case, it'll be certain pollinators that'll be blocked, but others can get in as well. But I don't know if André-Philippe you have anything to add to that regarding nets?
Not regarding nets specifically, but I would assume that protecting the plants is important for the first year or two, and then you can get rid of the nets and
that's a good point as well. The nets were an important timeline. The nets are mostly when the plants were small. Once they get big, so there's one of our mixes, if you remember, has bourrache, which I do not know the name in English, I apologize. And pardon me? Oh, I thought somebody said the name.
The same.
It's the same thing, bourrache? Yeah, perfect. So one of those were those, and it grew very quickly, and the groundhogs didn't touch it. So it's also making choices. Okay, you're going to put the nets until the plants are a certain size. A lot of native plants as well get very big, very high. And at that point, the groundhogs don't. It's mostly the tender shoots that they're going to go after. They're not going to necessarily go off for the larger plants that are after 2-3 years are stronger and more robust. And therefore we would not need nets.
Hello, the last slide before the end, you had gardien des pollinisateurs, and you just sort of went over it. Is it a certification? Can you explain more what that is?
Of course, yeah. Gardien des pollinisateurs is one of the projects we have that we're putting into place now. And basically we work with organizations, schools, etc., companies that want to plant gardens, and we're trying to plant gardens or help them plant gardens in places where we can connect all those. So there's like a center, it's 1,000 square meters in all. There's going to be a central garden, and then that'll be the base, let's say the center of our Opération Gardien des Pollinisateurs, and then there'll be smaller gardens around that. And so we're working with partners to see if we can, on the island of Montreal, it wouldn't necessarily have to be one partner. It could be, well, a school has a smaller garden, but a hospital has a bigger garden. And so it was the example of creating ecological corridors using the community. So be it individuals, but also different organizations.
So you're going to map them out?
Pardon me?
Are you going to plan to map them out?
Map them out? Well, I mean, the idea.
No, but it should be a répertoire. It should be a map of gardens, so we know where they are.
That would be, I mean, that's one of our plans as well. We're growing, so we were about 3 years ago, we were about 3 permanent employees, and now we're about 13 year-long permanent employees, so that we have a lot of plans for the future. So one of them is to have a map and be able to say, oh, look at these gardens, and that way also potentially citizens could be like, oh, well, there's a garden near me. I'm going to go visit it. I'm going to go see what there is and potentially be inspired to create my own garden. So definitely mapping them out is in our plans.
A comment about lawns. You had spoken about lawns. Seems to be either you cut lawns or you let them go wild, but there's an intermediary that I spoke to in municipalities to just get your public works guys to bring the blades up a couple inches, because usually they're adjustable. So at least if, you know, because I wasn't a back yellow, like, and it was a sea of white, it was all clover. And the guy came by and cut it all. It's like, if you just let the grass and all the plants that are mixed into the grass grow to 3 to 4 inches, depending on the blade height you can do. And as far as social acceptability, you know, you go from this height to this height. It's not a big difference, you know, they're not going to like complain, you know. So it's a question of finding that middle ground that's good for biodiversity and also would be socially acceptable as well. And also, and I argued also at one of the municipalities that if they're longer, you keep dampness in the ground and it doesn't go yellow in July, because if you cut it too short, then it just bleaches and it's really ugly. So if you want to beautify any, you know, park in your neighborhood, you don't want yellow grass, you know, I mean, it doesn't serve any purpose at all. So I keep it just a little bit longer, helps everything. And as a transition kind of.
Yeah, I totally agree. And for pollinators, so there's the frequency, there's the height, and there's also some habitats need to be mowed to avoid the, you know, plant succession, to keep them as open habitats. And there's also the moments at which the mowing is done. So in nature parks now, they are keeping open habitats, but they are mowing like late in the season when well, most pollinators are already well, not gone, but you know, the season is over for them. So yeah, good points about the height. And it all ends up in less management costs in the end, because of yeah, less you use less gas. You don't need to water, as you said, because the soil stays damp longer. Those are all excellent points.
There's a biodiversity garden at Métro Gru, which is pretty big, and it just got fauché.
Oh.
Which I think, I mean, if you want a habitat, a lot of animals have to live there in the winter. And if you cut it right to the ground, it's useless. I mean, you just lost the habitat, the winter habitat. And also, yeah, there's mice and other small critters that are living there. So I was like wondering why that was done at the Metro. I mean, it is so-called end of season, but there's also the winter season coming, and then we need habitat. You know, you supplied food for all these, you know, could be mason bees or whatever, and then suddenly you take it all away, and then there's no habitat for winter. So, I mean, there's different heights, but I mean, it's, you know, like it's cut.
Yeah, well, I can't comment on that case specifically. I don't know what happened there. Maybe some, yeah, I don't know.
It's municipal territory, right? So it's
yeah, but the territory is big. So yeah, I can't comment on that specific case. but I feel like it's unfortunate that it happened that way. Right?
Because your signage up that this is a biodiversity area and, so people know what it is. And, yeah, so it's kind of disappointing. Because the city wants to do things and they do it and then suddenly it's gone, it's like.
Yeah. Sometimes communications is an issue, and it takes time for all the people in the different services to get used with the new ways of doing things. So, but I don't know what happens. Like at the Métro Lionel Groux.
Hi, so you mentioned that you kind of let the gardens grow by themselves eventually. But I'm curious if you monitor for invasive or non-natural species and if you do any removal.
Yes, we definitely monitor. So it's not, they're not completely hands off. Even if we take away the invasive, like the exotic invasive species, there can be local species. Well, even if we're talking about ragweed, that can take up a lot of space. If we're talking over hundreds of years, it would balance it out, but we're being humans, we want things to be quicker than hundreds of years. So short term, we need to monitor it to make sure that there's not one species taking over all the space over other species. So there is still work to be done. It's less than, let's say, if you had a garden just with exotic plants or plants that are not perennials, but there's still some work to be done to make sure that you don't find yourself with a garden just with one type of native plant.
I had a question about the meadow spaces.
Mhm.
I know I've seen all over the city lots of signs saying like the space isn't being mowed and we're allowing the species to grow. I'm wondering if either of you have experience with a difference between when a meadow space is just left to grow on its own versus if it's intentionally seeded with native species to go in there.
Regarding plants.
Yeah. Like I'm thinking of like the more open spaces you see around a lot of the parks. And I guess maybe to be more specific, like are those seeded in the big public parks? Are they seeded with species or are they just left to like natural succession to see what comes up? Or
Okay. Well, it depends on where you're looking at. In most nature parks, they just reduce the mowing frequency, so it's what was there that is growing, so no seeding. But in other places where there's actual restoration or habitat creation efforts, those will be seeded then or planted with seedlings. But yeah, in Parc Maisonneuve, for example, next to which I work, they just stopped mowing. They did plant trees in some areas, but the flowers that are blooming right now were already there.
I guess I'm wondering too, then, like if it's just not planted, it's just left unmowed, if there's any data on like the species that are coming up, like are they native species? How are they benefiting for the pollinators more or less than if we were to seed those spaces?
Oh, okay. We don't, well, at the Insectarium, we don't have that data. I know some organizations, for example, in Verdun, they do look at that. And we are looking at the insect part. So maybe in a few years, we'll have a better understanding of those kind of dynamics. But right now, I think it's a bit too soon to answer, at least regarding the insects. I can't speak much for the plants, though, because it's not my expertise.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm wondering. Like if you have native species, do you have more native insects, which we do, but yeah, I guess it's too soon because we've only been leaving these spaces unmowed for a year or so.
Yeah, it's a recent approach that's being put in place, and yeah, so recent that at some places it takes time to implement efficiently those new approaches and see the results in the end.
Thanks. We have one more question online, it seems. Are there plans to have an English version of the Polyflora website?
Do we have an English version of the Polyflora website? That's the question.
Either now or in the future, if there isn't one.
I would like to have that would be also one of the plans, a long term. We just have to see with the how everything goes, but I would love to have an English version of the Polyflora website, or at least have some educational resources for those who are Anglophone who want to know more. But for now, it's for sure for Space for Life. For now, there's a lot of stuff on Space for Life, and then maybe one day Polyflora as well.
Any other questions or comments from the audience? Yeah. It would be interesting to have at least one online public conference on that same topic every year and to broadcast it with the support of every library and other type of third space, like fourth space. That's funny. Citizens don't have sufficient access to that very local information. We need to collectively do better. Yeah.
So to have more conferences about native plants and pollinators that are more accessible to the larger public. Yeah, I mean, I would love that. I'd love doing conferences about pollinators and plants and talking about wasps and everything. So I agree. If we could have more of those, I would be down.
Respectfully, any more questions? We all good? Any more comments? Things that you would like to bring up, mention? Doing okay? Okay, wonderful.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, everyone. I just wanted to let you know, well, first of all, I wanted to thank you all for coming into Space for this conversations, presentations, all the questions, of course, and from the questions online was really great. We're going to be closing up the Zoom and the live stream now, but just let you know, this is available on our YouTube channels. You can go home and watch it later. And please join us again at Space and have a great afternoon. Thank you.